Hi, my name is Derek Bingham, and welcome to the fourth episode of our GraphQL real-time race. I'm excited to be here to take you through the next step in our journey. We'll be talking about how to integrate chat into our application. My name is Derek Bingham. I am a senior developer advocate at AWS. I look after the good developer folks down in Australia and New Zealand. And any questions you see in today's show, you can reach out to me in the socials, or any questions about developing on AWS. I'm here to help. So let's get into today's show. So here's a quick agenda. So I'm going to go over, as I said, how to integrate chat into our application. Now we'll be using, as always, we'll be using GraphQL and a few other services. I'll go over those services that we're using today. In the second part of the show, I will show you maybe services you've used before on AWS, services you may not have used. So we'll go through those and we'll show you what they do. And then finally, we'll get into the cool stuff. So we will start building out our application live as part of this show, and we'll see how it go. The demo gods will be shining, I'm sure, and we'll have a lot of fun along the way. So for those of you who are watching this show and haven't seen the previous episodes, I think I'd start this with a little recap on what we've done so far and what our application looks like. So the application we're building is a real-time race, and it looks a little bit like this. I'm going to just now switch into my development environment and show you all what's been built so far in the previous episodes. So here is my development environment. I'm using Cloud9, and we'll be using this throughout today's show. Cloud9 is a web developer environment that you can get to via the AWS console. So this is how I can launch the app. I can go preview running application. It will launch in this browser here. I can externalize it there so you can see a bit more. So this is our application that we're building, the GraphQL real-time racing app. We've got a little landing page here with a cool little graphic. And then all of the functions that we've built so far are in this menu. The main one we have is a map that we've built out showing the Monza Raceway. And we've got our little person here, and we've got geocoding that we can move around and see when the person enters and exits the application. The app itself is built all using AWS Amplify, which we'll use again today, GraphQL for the API, and Amazon DynamoDB for the backend. So that's what we've built so far to help us, have a interactive time at a racing event. So what are we going to do today? So in this session, we're going to do part 4, which is integrate real-time chat. We've already built the app, so the scaffold for the app in session 1. In session 2, we built out the API to start storing data using GraphQL. In session 3, we added that cool little map and added location-based services. And then in this session, in session 4, we're going to add some real-time chat. So if I have a number of friends that are going to the race and we want to chat with each other, we can use this new feature that I'm going to build today to do that. So first, I'm going to go through the tools and services that I'm going to use today to build out this chat application. Now, first of all, you've already seen Cloud9, which is the IDE I'm going to use today. As well as Cloud9, I'm going to use primarily for my development libraries and frameworks, I'm going to use AWS Amplify. So we've used AWS Amplify in the previous sessions, and it's a set of tools and services that we can use to build out mobile and front-end applications, and we're using it again today. For backend services, there's a number of backend services that we're using today. A number of them we've already used in the previous sessions, but today I'm also going to just go through them again in case you missed those previous sessions. So the first one we have is AWS AppSync. So AppSync is our managed GraphQL service. So we'll be using that to serve our GraphQL API and schema definitions. The second one is and one we haven't used before. So this is Amazon Simple Storage Service, or S3. So this is where I'm going to upload and store images. And it's a great use case for using S3, which is our durable object store. Also today, we're going to use AWS Lambda. AWS Lambda is our event-driven function programming. And so it's all almost, when we think about Lambda, we think about serverless, but most of these services today that we're using are all classified as serverless because you don't have to worry about the underlying infrastructure. Next, we've got Amazon Pinpoint. So Amazon Pinpoint is what we're going to use to do our notifications. So we're going to use Pinpoint is a service that we use to gather analytics from our application, but also to send out messages to different channels. So a channel could be SMS, could be email, could be push notifications into a phone. All of these we can control with Amazon Pinpoint. And then finally, we're using Amazon DynamoDB as our persistence level store for our application. So what are we building? Let's look what we are building today. Let's look at that architecture. We're going to start off with first of all, integrating the app into our application. So this is getting the bones and the scaffolding of that chat application into our application. So how are we going to do that? We're going to mutate or change our AWS AppSync schema. We're going to give that a view of what a message looks like. So as you know, chat applications require messages. So we need to build that model and add that to their AppSync schema. We also then, of course, need to persist the messages as they come through, and we're going to do that in Amazon DynamoDB. And then we need to write some client code to communicate with the new API endpoints that deal with messages. So what does that look like? What sort of steps do we need to do? So breaking it down, the first thing we need to do, we need to create a new type. So a type, if you remember from previous episodes, is how we define an object in a GraphQL schema. So for this one, we're going to have an object or a type called message. After we do that, we need to then create a relationship between a message and an event type. So an event type, if you remember, is the entire container of each event. So the idea being that each chat session is tied to a particular event. So if I go to race A, I can only talk and message people who are at race A, and likewise in any other race. And then the next step we need to create a subscription so clients get notified when messages occur in an event. So a subscription is how GraphQL and AWS AppSync manage communication back to the client. So if someone wants to message me, I want to receive that notification back into the client, and so that client must register for a subscription. So we need to do that. And then finally, we need to update the client code to call all of these new GraphQL operations that use the types that we've created. So let's go into the workshop and let's get started. So here is our workshop. So this is the section that I'll be doing today, real-time chat and notifications. So these are our instructions that we're going to do. The first thing that we need to do is define our model. So we go into our IDE, which is there. And in our IDE, we need to go and find our schema. So the schema is under here. It's under Amplify. We've got all our backend, all of our features that we've added. Schema is part of the API, and we open up the schema. Currently, with no knowledge of our message, so let's put in knowledge of that message. So I'm just copying it from the instructions, paste it in there, and I'll quickly go through it. So here's our type message. It's got a number of fields, event ID, which is our key, And also we've got a number of auth rules that we only applying. Owner can have create, rewrite, update privileges. Any other person using the application can have read privileges. We've got some non-mandatory fields. We've got some mandatory fields, ID and string, and the rest is just some fields that we've got. And there is our relationship to the event type there. So we're going event relationship is on the event ID field. So that's our model. I'll just save that. The next thing I need to do is we need to push this model change into the back end. So what I'm going to do there is our old Amplify. Yes, so this will then push that change into our back end and deploy that schema change into AWS AppSync. Cool. So while we're doing that, that should just go. So we'll just wait for that to finish. Um, so while that's happening, the other thing we can do, we can actually create what can we do? We can create a new terminal and start adding the additional dependencies that we need to start interacting with our API. So the next step in the tutorial, if we slip back here, it's annoying, is we can go update code. So we need to add a few libraries. So GUID ID, so we can install that. And we need to update the file chat.txx. So we've got the code here already in instructions. So I'll copy that across. And then we'll go through the important operations in that code. So let's do that next. So the first thing I need to do, I need to copy this add, go back into here, and paste it in. That shouldn't take too long. The next stage is to update our chat source code. So where does that live? So that lives under source and chat.txx. So I'll open that up here. And at the minute, it doesn't do anything. So it's a very empty file. So I will then go back to instructions and copy the chat.txx back into workshop and just replace that completely. Remembering to save. So this is our new TXX file. So it's quite long. It's doing a number of things, but the most important part is all defined in the actual workshop instructions itself. So let's just close that. So the first thing that we do in that chat.txx, we go and we call API.graphql, which is our Amplify client library function. And we can query all of the events that currently are in a part of the race. Once we've done that, we can then go, okay, fetch all the messages for a particular event once you've selected the event. And then once the event has been selected, you know all the messages, you then can display those messages, but also register as a subscription on the event so you can then get other messages that come through the event while you're looking at it. And then if you want to send a message yourself, the API mutation, you can create a mutation and send that up to the API. So if you remember GraphQL itself, we've got the concept of query to get information, mutation to change information, and subscription to get information back to the client. Let's see if our deployment has fixed, and there we go. So our schema has been updated, it's deployed, our endpoint is there. Let's go and see if our app is running. It's running, so let's go and see what our chat looks like. So I can preview an application. There's our application. I can then externalize again to the browser. So if I externalize the app, you can see, just so I get the most recent version, I can go into my chat menu, and here's our chat application. So if I select an event, I can then start typing a message. Hello, because this is a new event, so I won't have any existing messages. And you can see that I have some messages. So the other thing I can do to check that this is all working nicely is I can go back into here, select the same event. So chat, this event. You'll see my message here. What I'll do here, I'll actually log out of by myself. So I'm signing out on this browser. I'll then change my user to a different user. I've created a few different users here. Sign in. Get the password right. Sign in. Skip that part. So if I select the same event, I can see a message, but I can also type in my own. And it'll come up with my user. If I go back to the other browser, it'll then pop it up is right away. So that's the subscription firing, brings it into the UI, and that's my chat working quite well. And that's the first stage of our workshop. So what we've done, just to recap, we have defined our new model. We have defined the type of message. We have registered the subscription to message. So that any messages that occur in a particular event that you're registered with, you will get that message as a subscription. We've then pushed those changes up to the GraphQL API. We've updated our client code, kind of chat.txx, and in that client code, we've built API calls that will query all the events. And once we've selected event from the dropdown, we can then query all of the messages for that event and show them. Once we've done that, any new messages that we send, it will create a mutation and send it up to the API. And then any subscriptions that we've registered, we will then get that message. And we've tried that out with a number of users. So that works really well. So let's go to part 2 of this workshop. Adding images. So back into our slide, and let's talk about what adding images will look like. So with images, we need to do a couple of additions to our existing chat app. So what we're going to do is add 2 new services into this architecture. The first service is AWS Lambda. So AWS Lambda works on events. So it's a serverless event-driven service that we can wire up to Amazon DynamoDB. So when what you can do is listen on any changes to the messages in Amazon DynamoDB, and based on those changes, you can get your event to do a certain thing. In this case, what we're going to do, we're going to get that Lambda to generate a thumbnail and stick it on into Amazon Simple Storage Service or Amazon S3. So what that will do is then that will associate that thumbnail with a message. So as a user, if I'm creating a message, I will upload an image. That message will then trigger Lambda to generate a thumbnail from that image, and then that thumbnail can be served back to the clients as part of their messages. So if I am Derek, I can assign a message, attach an image. That image will upload, thumbnail will be generated, and then every other person who's listening to those event messages will get the thumbnail instead of the full image, which will be a lot quicker, cleaner, and faster. So let's see what we need to do. So breaking it down, the first thing we need to do is create that S3 bucket to store our images and our thumbnails. Then we need to also grant access to the API, to the Lambda, so that they can change those images and work with them and retrieve them. Next, we need to create that Lambda function that does all the work of creating the thumbnail when the new image is uploaded. And then we need to update the GraphQL schema to be aware of that image. So currently our messages have no concept of images whatsoever. So if you think of the message type, we need to change that so it has a concept of what an image is. And then finally, we need to update the client code so we can interact with S3. Let's go back to our workshop and see what that looks like. So here is the next stage of our workshop. And there is that diagram that I showed you earlier. And so what we're going to do first. So the first thing we need to do is we need to add storage and update our existing resources. So the storage, when we talk about storage, it's another Amplify category. So when we talk about Amplify and adding features to Amplify apps, we talk about feature categories, one of which is storage. Another one could be API. So when we add a storage category, it will ask us, do you want to add a Amazon DynamoDB piece of storage, or do you want to add an S3 piece of storage? So underneath that storage category, there's the actual implementations. So that's why Amplify is so cool, because it abstracts away those implementations details for you through the use of categories. So let's do that first. Let's add storage into our app. So back into my IDE, I'll just clean it up a bit again. Here. Oh, fill that out. Okay. So the first one is Amplify, Amplify, add storage. So this is the implementation. So what we want to do, not a NoSQL database. We want to do content, i.e. S3, images, audio, video, etc. So I select that. Next, I'm going to provide a friendly name. So as these are chat images, I'm going to call them chat images. Next, I need to create a bucket name. So bucket names are globally unique. So I will call this chat images. Let's hope DB. Not that. Let's go for chat images and see what happens. Who do you like access? So this is access control to the images itself. I only want authenticated users to have access to these images. I don't want guests, so I'll choose auth. What kind of access do you want for authenticated users? So for authenticated users, I want full CRUD access. So they can create images in the chat. That's that. Hit enter. Do you want to have a Lambda trigger for your S3 bucket? Yes, we do. And do you want to create a new function or choose an existing function? So for this one, we want to create a new function. Hit enter. So do you want to edit the local file? Do you want to now? So we don't. I'm going to do that as part of the instructions. Okay, so that's that. So we've now created our S3 bucket. The next thing we need to do is update that function. So we've created it as part of the storage category, but let's. So the next thing we want to do is another amplify command. It's amplify update function. It will either prompt me to do you want to do a Lambda function or do you want to do a Lambda layer? We'll do a Lambda layer a little bit later in the lab, but for this one, we're going to do Lambda function. So select the trigger function that I've just created, which is that one. So what do you want to do with it? So what we want to do is change the resource access permissions. And what we want to do is what other services do we want to give access to this trigger? So what we're going to do is, so the API has access, and what part of it? So we want the API mutation to obviously change and trigger this function. And then do you want to edit it locally? And again, we'll hit no. So that's all that done. We've created a function. We have allowed the API to interact with the function. The next thing we need to do is we need to create a function to generate the Lambda thumbnails. So this is another function. So it's Amplify function. Again, what are we going to do here? Well, what we're going to do here is we're going to create a function that's shared across other functions. So it's called a Lambda layer. So we're going to create one of those, hit enter. We're going to give it a name. So for this one, we're going to use a third-party library called Sharp. So we're going to call it Sharp. We're going to build that in Node.js. So I select Node.js space and enter. The current AWS account will always have access to this layer. So for this one, so I'm just going to hit and enter to skip. I'm not going to make any changes here. And so that's that layer created as well. So let's have a look at that code. So as the code for every thing that we create in Amplify, it's all under this Amplify directory. Under the backend directory, we then have our types, and this one was function, and we created the Sharp function. So let's go in here. So here we have our Sharp function. Now what we need to do is we need to actually get into this directory, and so let's go back to our instructions so we remember. So let's do a recap. So we've added our storage and our resources. So add storage, went through all those options. We next added a S3 trigger function to grant access to the AppSync API. So we've done that. We then, next bit we're doing, we need to add the function that's a Lambda layer, and we've created that. We next need to go into the terminal directory. So why I have done that is I want to just cheat here and copy that and go in here into my terminal and go cd. Once I'm in that directory, the next part of the instruction is to install the Sharp library. So npm install Sharp, which what we'll be using to generate these thumbnails, which is really easy to do. It's all done like that. And now we need to go back to our original library. So our original folder. So I'm going to go back to two more. Once we're back in our original folder, we're going to then update our function again. So what we're going to do now is the layer that we've just created, we need to add it to the function that we've just created. So if you think about it, we're creating two things here. We're creating the trigger function and the layer function. We need the trigger function to use the layer function. So we're just doing that dependency now. So what we want to update is the function, Lambda function. We want to select the trigger function. And what we want to do here, do you want to update? And we want to change the Lambda layers configuration. You want to do that? Yes, we do. And then it provides us which layer you want to use. So, and it's very handy that Sharp is already there. So we select that, hit enter. It's version 1, hit enter. And do you want to change it locally? No. So that's added that function to the Lambda layer to the trigger function. So let's have a look at the code for the trigger function. So we're back into the function directory, source, index.js. So at the minute, this trigger function doesn't do much apart from does some logging. So back to our instructions, we have some code in our instructions that actually is the trigger function. So again, we'll click on the little white flashing little, I think it's a little star. We click on that and we copy it. We go back into our code and we paste it in. So that's it. So what it's doing, it's in the handler itself. It's getting records that's been passed in, putting the object in. It is then decoding it, generating the thumbnail, and it's ready to go. So that's that Lambda function. There's a important warning in the actual instructions for this that's worth pointing out. So this warning is, so if you think about it, the Lambda function is triggered when the new object is added to the bucket. So it actually itself creates a new image. So thumbnail is an image, it adds it to the same bucket. So you're really at risk of having an infinite loop. So be very careful when changing this if you want to play around with it, because you could easily end up with an infinite loop. So just read that, and there's a nice little link as well to help you if you don't if you want more details on that. So the next thing we need to do is we need to update our schema so it has knowledge of what an S3 object is, or the bucket image is. And we do a number of things I'll point out here. We add an IAM provider. So this is adding IAM credentials so they can have access to the bucket. And then we actually defining the S3 object as the original and thumbnail, so the original image and the thumbnail, and then we've got a new type called S3 object. So I'm going to copy this and push this into my schema. So the schema is part of the API, and it's part of the schema. So I then replace message because I've added to it, and I've got S3 object as well there. So that looks right, and save that. Back into our instructions, the next thing we need to do is check that we've done everything right, because we've done a lot there. We just need to make sure that we've got everything. So we do an Amplify status just to check that. So it should go like that. So let's go there and go into our terminal. Clear that. Go Amplify status. So what we've done, we've created our storage, we've created 2 functions, and we've changed our API. So we've changed our API to give it access to the function. So that looks pretty good. I'm happy with that. If you go back to the instructions, there's this optional instruction that I'm actually going to do. So the thing with Lambda is when you just create a Lambda function, you have default values that you use. So these default values may impact the behavior of the application and the user experience. So for this one, I'm actually going to tweak the timeout and memory size for the Lambda function. And the cool news and the cool thing, we can actually change that. We can change all of that. So what we're going to do is to change it, we actually go into the cloud formation that was generated. So the Amplify CLI, when we use an Amplify command, will generate the cloud formation that will then provision the backend services when we do an Amplify push. So, but we can change that cloud formation template here in the backend directory. So let's do that for the trigger function. So we've got a trigger function. Here is the cloud formation template, and we need to change the timeout. So timeout, I'm just searching for it. There it is. It's currently at 25. So I'm going to change the timeout. See, I'm also going to add in another argument called memory size. So memory size, we can also tune Lambda functions, and this will handle larger images. Correct. I just need that there. Timeout 60, memory size 1024. So mistype. So once we're happy with that, we can close that and go amplify push. So again, I'll clear the terminal so you can see it better. Amplify push. That will push all of our changes that we've just went through into the back end. So while that's doing that, the next bit is to update our code, so our chat.txx, so it has knowledge of the new storage capability that we've added, the storage category that we've added to our application. So if I go into, this is chat.txx. So if I go into the instructions again, we'll see that update the chat component to use the new storage category. We can just copy that. So what I need to do is copy this code. So I'm going to replace the entire code with it, and show you what's happened here. So if I go up to the top, that didn't work. If I go up to the top, you'll see that in my import statement, I have this concept of the storage category, which I've imported from Amplify. So storage itself, I can define, and you'll see the different operations that I do in this code for the storage category. The first one is storage.put will upload the image into S3, and then I'm passing in metadata about the image as well, like the owner, and then we've also got storage.get, which is pulling the image back, and then that's it. So that's a really simple use of the storage category. Other things that I need to do is, because I've added the concept of the S3 object, I need to change my GraphQL YAML file, which is how I define settings for my GraphQL schema. I need to change that to give it a max depth of 3, because it defaults to 2. So I'm just need to do that. There it is. I'm going to just change that to 3. Save that. So now we've got the that is set to 3. Just check that. I'm just going to tidy these up a bit. Let's clear that. Clear my schema. Index with fixed. Chat with fixed. We're still deploying our resources. So let's wait until that finishes. There's one more step we need to do because as if we have changed changed GraphQL config, so we need to run another amplify command to regenerate our local type bindings. So when you define a schema, you need to, and a cool thing that Amplify will do, it'll also generate code bindings for that schema. So that then you can interact with objects in that schema really, really easy using code. So the last thing we're going to do before we can test out our images is we need to run the amplify code gen command, which is that one there. Once we run that, we can then try out our application. So let's just wait till our deployment's finished. So that's it all finished now. So the next step, as I said, was to run code gen. So why do I need to run it? Because it'll regenerate the models for me. So it's amplify in, and just to make sure that everything, all the local types are compiled to the most recent version. So that should take a couple of seconds. So now code gen is done. Let's run our application. So it's already running. So if we preview run an application, again, we'll launch it into a big browser and go into our chat, select our event, and there's our other messages. So I'm going to create a message. Check this out. I'm going to upload that image. So I'm going to create some image that I've got pre-prepared. Is a 8-bit profile of me. Open and then enter, should upload it. Oh, enter, should upload it. So now that's uploading, it'll upload. You'll see the thumbnail function will be run, and then the subscription will bring that thumbnail back to me. So if I go into as another person, there you have it. So that's images done. So the next step is our final step in today's workshop is to go and push some notifications to our chat. So here's the architecture for notifications. How does that look like? So again, we're going to use a Lambda trigger for these notifications, but we're going to have the Lambda trigger invoking other services. And in this case, we're going to use Amazon Pinpoint. So Amazon Pinpoint is going to be invoked when we get a new message, and it's going to send an email to the other people in the chat. And so if they're online, don't have the app open, they will get that push notification that there's been a chat message for them. So let's build out that. The steps for that. Let's break it down. So the first thing we need to do is we need to create an Amazon Pinpoint service to serve out these push notifications to clients. So that the emails, so the Pinpoint service, as well as emails that we'll do today, can also do SMS and need a push. You can also, next step, we need to create that Lambda function to listen to these changes. So for any new messages, it needs to look at those using DynamoDB streams and make sure and send that to Pinpoint. Then once Pinpoint gets that event, it'll go, okay, I need to send that to the email channel. So we need to set that up. And then we need to test it all and make sure it works. So let's get into that. So let's tidy up our screen again. Go into our instructions briefly. So the first thing we need to do is we need to add the analytics category. So let's go into our terminal, clear all that, and do the amplify, add analytics. Again, it will prompt us for some options. We're going to use Pinpoint for this one. So hit Pinpoint. So we need to create a Pinpoint resource name. We're going to call this GraphQL real-time race. Once that's done, it needs authorization to send analytics events, so that's all good. And then that's analytics done. The next thing we need to do is add that function to listen to for message changes. So let's amplify add again function. So again, we're going to do a serverless function. Give it a function name. So for this one, we're going to call it the pinpoint interface. We're going to give it a name. So I'm going to call Node.js. Is going to be the language of choice that we're going to use here. A type of function. So this will be a boilerplate that will give some boilerplate code it'll give us. So we're just going to go a Lambda trigger. What event is going to trigger it? So it's going to be a DynamoDB stream because it's coming out of DynamoDB. And we're going to use the model. So we're not going to give it a stream ID. We're going to use the API category. So let's choose that. So what message, what model, what type in the model is going to listen to? We're going to listen to message. And do I want to create advanced settings? Yes, I do. Do you want to access other resources in this project? Yes, I do. Which one? So we're going to access analytics because we want to send stuff to Pinpoint. So we'll select that. And what sort of access do we need? Let's give it full access, CRUD operations. Enter. And do you want to be recurring schedule? No, it's going to be an event. And do you want to configure Lambda layers? Nope, you don't. And do you want to edit it? No, I don't. So that's that function created as well. The next thing we need to do is actually define the code for the function. So let's go into backend, into our function, into our pinpoint interface function, into the source code, into the code, and replace that code with the function code that's already been defined. So again, click on the star, copy it, and replace all of that. Make sure you save it. So that's what we do here. And what we need to do is there's some inputs in here. So you need to define, need to update the address. So this is the from field. So any emails need to come from. So I'm going to use my email for this as a from field. So that'll get that. And then the final thing we need to do, if you go back to the instructions, once we've passed in the code and I've added my email address, the next thing you do is the permissions for the Lambda function. So permissions, again, are defined in the Cloud Formation template, and we need to change the IAM policy for the IAM execution policy. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to go back into my workshop. I'm going to go into the Cloud Formation template of Pinpoint. I'm going to search for that string. Oops. Really? It is the policy, and here I'm just going to create a new policy statement. I'm just going to paste the code that it says here. Copy it here. Paste it in. That's that new statement, and I'll probably need after that. Once that's done, we go back into our instructions and we do the amplify push. Yes, so let's do that. Here. So if I look at the status, I expect to see two things that have been added, pinpoint and the pinpoint function. Yep. So create function analytics. So amplify push. So now the next thing I need to do is verify that my email address is verified. So the email address that I've added from the from field needs to make sure, I need to make sure that pinpoint is set up correctly. So let's do that while we're waiting for that to deploy. And we do that by really handy command. It's called amplify console, which will give us the URL to the backing amplify services. So once that comes back with the URL, we'll open a browser and have a look. So we have, it gives us the choice of admin UI or amplify console. So we select amplify console. Click on that link. And this will bring up the amplify console, which is the part of Amplify that runs inside the AWS console. So we can see there's current deployment activity, and it's the update is in progress, so it's still going on. So this is our analytics function, and we just wait for that pinpoint to be provisioned. So I'll just wait, go back, and wait for this to finish. So that deployment's now finished. So if we go into Amplify console and do a refresh, we should now see that we have got an analytics that we can view in Pinpoint. So this is the Pinpoint console. So what I need to do, I need to expand settings, hit email, and then so next thing I do is identity details. I need to edit my identity details, enable email channel as project. I need to verify any email address and the default sender address. So again, that email I put in the function. So it's Amazon there. And then hit save. So that will then allow me to test out my notifications. So if I go back into my application, so let's go into chat. Let's select an event. Is my application running? Let's check everything's good. Yep, let's preview it. Expand it. So in my chat, I could then, once I've selected an event, I could then go something along the lines of, you know, at Derek, which is the user. I'm leaving now here. So then that will invoke a message, and I should then get that in my email. So I'm just checking my email here. Yep. So if I can bring that across somehow. So there we are. There is the email from the Graph Real-Time Race Workshop notification. Hi, Senna. And Senna, who sent me the emails there, and I'm leaving now. So if I didn't have the app open, it's all there. So that's push notifications with email as well. So let's wash up. So the workshop today you can access through the URL there. This is step 4 of the workshop. So we've built out our chat application, and we can now send chat and build out that functionality inside the cool little Raceway application. Next up after today is a live real-time race. So we're going to track how races go in real time using AppSync. So that'll be the next section. Thanks for sticking around and watching me go through this workshop. I hope you have as much fun as I did doing it. And I hope you'll agree that it's a good little use case for how to really leverage Amplify and AppSync along with other serverless services within AWS to build out some functionality in a cool little app. My name is Derek Bingham, developer advocate at AWS. If you have any questions about developing cloud native applications on the platform, please reach out on the socials and I'll help you out where I can. Thanks for listening again, and I'll see you next time. Bye.